What's good, everyone? Evan Jarvis here. Today we are going to be doing a tier list for Heroes of Hold'em. This is the final tier list in my abilities series. Today we are going to be ranking the Thief's abilities from S tier to D tier. Just for some context, as always, this tier list is focused on the tough tournaments that you're going to face in Heroes of Hold'em, where you're playing against a lot of the other regulars and playing against a lot of players who have the abilities, be it in those 6-man sit and goes or in the big field tournaments. In terms of my expertise, I finished top 10 on the Heroes of Hold'em leaderboard, despite playing much lower volume and starting the season later than many of the other players. I final tabled the zombie horde numerous times, and I've also gotten plenty of wins against the toughest players in the game. Also, speaking specifically about Thief, I thought Thief was kind of whatever for quite some time. It has one less ability than all the other classes, which feels like it'd be pretty tough to play. But it looked like it might be a little fun. So in my journey of learning about all the different characters and learning the game as much as I could, I decided I would try to breed a high level Thief. Fortunately, I was able to breed a 557. It's a 577. 557 Diamond Thief. So a top ranked orc thief, and I was able to have a lot of fun with it and realize what the hype is all about when it comes to thieves. I think it's one of the best hero classes for playing against other heroes. So if played effectively, it's actually kind of a superhero in the mix, and I would highly recommend it. There's also been some discussion that the thief was made weaker than the other classes, so they may do something to give it one ability back. And if you start seeing thieves with 6 abilities, or even the halfling thieves with 7 abilities, you can believe it's on, and you can believe you're going to be seeing me play the thief a lot more often in my Heroes of Hold'em sessions. Anyway, this list was made both for my personal experience and also a big thank you to one of the community members who is the kind of thief expert who got me started in the process in the journey of understanding how to play a thief well. Really set me on a good path, and then I made some refinements later, and I feel like you are going to be getting the best information here in this tier list, because I also consulted the devs, one of whom Thief is his favorite character. So you got 2 absolute experts and someone who's had extremely good results since playing Thief. Hopefully you enjoy what's coming. Let's get into it. So the first ability is Alibi. Heal for 50% of a pot you lose at Showdown. Redirect that damage to the nearest minion to you clockwise. Now, normally you guys know that when it comes to healing spells, I pretty much put them all at S tier, because anytime you get extra lives, it's going to be S tier. And healing for 50% of a pot is a lot, especially, we've talked about how bark skin, you can chip up if you're playing a multi-way pot. Alibi enables you to do that. The one downside to Alibi is that if there are no minions on the table, you cannot cast the spell. So it's a healing spell that isn't guaranteed to be able to be used, and for that reason is often best used in early game or mid game. You have to be very aware of the table. You have to make sure that there's a minion there you can target, and then you need to force a big pot. But as you're going to see, a lot of the Thieves' abilities are based on forcing big pots and then just stealing them, which is what makes it so fun to play. I'm going to throw this in B tier because of the fact it doesn't always activate. Yeah, if it did, it'd be A tier, maybe even S tier. Probably S tier, honestly. But because of the possibility that it doesn't come through, I'm going to throw it in B tier. Next, we have Arcane Plunder. Steal any sheltering buffs, whatever duration is left, add an additional 2 hands and double the healing bonus. This is the Thief's way to actually shelter. It's going to go in A tier. It does require opponents to have a shelter buff, but because you can cast it pre-flop or on the river, it gives you lots of opportunities to steal those buffs when they're used. Very useful, very powerful. Once the thief gets that extra ability slot, fingers crossed, Arcane Plunder is going to be the ability that I will be adding to my build. Next, we have Backstab. All opponents losing Showdown to you take an additional 20% of the pot in damage. If Hide was played in the previous hand, that damage is 50%. This can be really good for getting the knockout blow, but you have to win a big pot, and then the opponents who take the damage also have to be in the Showdown. So for this to really be effective, you'd probably want to combine it with something like Cut Purse, which we'll get to, which forces everyone to be in the pot. And then you need to win that pot, and then you can hit him with Backstab for additional damage. So the idea of adding an additional 20% damage and potentially getting that KO is appealing, but because of all the variables that need to be in place and factors that need to be in place for it to actually trigger, I'm going to throw this in C tier. Next, we have Charisma. Make a raise. All players are prevented from raising the rest of the hand. I'm going to throw this in D tier. I'm pretty sure even if they can't raise, they can still bet. You're basically just saying your open won't get 3-bet. There are way better abilities. This is going in D tier. I'm not talking about it. That's it. Coercion. Heads up. When raised, re-raise pot and force opponent to call. End all betting for the remainder of the hand. This one I'm going to throw in C tier. It's not every day that we're going to be heads up, although if we're playing enough games, we will be heads up every day. It's not every tournament we're going to be heads up. The only downside to this is that usually if your opponent's raised heads up, they're either going to be all in or they have a hand they're happy to play with. It's rare they're going to, min raise to steal and then not be happy calling a pot size raise. That being said, being able to turn a situation that's not all in into all in when you actually have a good hand is pretty solid. So I'm going to throw this in C tier because also heads up is where you get the most rank bonus and the most tokens bonus. So it's where you'd like to have some extra skills if possible. Speaking of skills, first S tier 1, making the list, cut purse, call the big blind, force all players to call, steal 50% of the pot. This is basically like the tithe of the cleric, except you get 50% of the pot instead of the full amount of the pot. Cut purse is epic. You basically print 2.5 big blinds out of thin air. You can also force other players to be put all in the tournaments where average stack is 1 or 2 big blinds on the final table. And it can just be a really good end game ability that also helps you get some free chips. Bread and butter of the thief builds. Definitely cut purse. Definitely want to have it. Next, we have evade traps. Remove all debuffs from yourself. This is going to be an A tier ability. Very important to have those debuff cleansing abilities when playing in tough lineups. Gotta have it A tier. Next, we have Eye Poke. Reveal a random hole card of yours to the table for the next 6 hands. If you win the hand, receive an extra 30% of the pot in health. I'll put this one in D tier. First off, I don't really like giving free information to my opponents. Then if I do, I have to play with a handicap. And then if I do win the pots, I get 30% extra health. It just seems like it's going to be hard to win those hands. And that the reward isn't all that great for it anyway. So I'm going to throw that in D tier. Something I'm not going to throw in D tier is Fool Schooled. Call a non-all-in bet without losing any health. This is definitely A tier. And if you could call an all-in bet with it, it would definitely be S tier. This is free chips to the maximum, not capped at bet size, 3x, 4x, 5x, whatever it is. Anything other than all-in you can call, and you can cast this at any time. Pre-flop, flop, turn, river. Extremely useful ability. Really great to get free chips, especially when they're to the tune of unlimited. The only downside about it is that you can't use it for all-in bets, but there may be ability coming up that you can. All right, next we have Gaffle. When heads up with a non-dragon minion, steal the pot. This is going to go into the B tier for me. As with most of the other tier lists, the B tier section was generally reserved for the minion-based builds, and the B tier here is going to include a lot of mess with the minion abilities. Gaffle's crazy. You get heads up in a heads up pot with a non-dragon minion. If you're on the river and you think you're going to lose, you just steal the pot. You just steal the pot. So you can basically just go reckless, try to get all in against a minion that's not a dragon, and then steal a pot on the river and double up for free. It's pretty insane. The only downside is it has to be against a minion, and it can't be a dragon. But early game, you should be able to find those situations pretty easily, and it allows you to just play a crazy style of poker, which, again, is super fun and one of the reasons that I really enjoy playing the Thief. Next is Gamble. Pay 25% of the current pot into the pot, discard your hole cards, and draw 2 new hole cards activated on flop. I'll throw this in C tier. Getting 2 random cards, useful. Can make things fun. The only thing is usually when going to a flop, I like to know the cards I'm going to have. And going with a random hand against a hand that someone has chosen to play, not necessarily the best proposition. Better than having a bad hand against what you think is a good hand. I think you can also use this in all-in situations. So this can get you out of a situation where you're dominated or whatever. But no, you'd have to pay 25% of the current pot, which you don't have. So a very specific situation you need to be in. Seems like it could be fun, but fun isn't always the most fruitful. And there are much better abilities that we can use on our thieves than Gamble. One of those abilities, one of the very best abilities the thief has, is Guild Dues. Call any raise when not heads up. Health cost is divided and paid by opponents at 20% each. All players folded get their cards back. S tier. I was telling you that, Fool's Gold is great, but you can't use it for all-in bets. Guild dues you can use for all-in bets. And when you use it for all-in bets, not only do you get to call the raise for free, everyone else has to pay a percentage of the raise. Sure, they get their cards back, but if they were going to fold, their cards are probably trash anyway. So you just basically dent them for 20%. Yeah, you dent them for 20% of whatever the initial raise was. Like, it's wild. So not only do you get to call a raise for free, you get to force your opponents to pay a part of the raise. And if it's the big stack in the tournament raising, casting guild dues can force the rest of the table to potentially be all in. It's an absolutely insane spell or insane ability. The only time it doesn't work is if you're in a heads up pot. So sometimes post flop you won't be able to use it, but pre flop you can pretty much always use it unless it's blind versus blind. And if there's another player all in and it's a side pot, post flop you're still not considered heads up, I don't believe. So this spell is just, ability is crazy good. Must have. Incredible. All right, next we have Hide. When folding, all health you have put into the pot is removed from the hand and entered into the starting pot for next hand. I'm going to throw this one in C tier. It's nice that you can use it, I think, on any street. I think you can probably use it. No, you know what? You probably can't use it when you're all in because you have to fold. So yeah, that's probably why it's C instead of B. If you could use it in all-in situations, I'd throw it in B, but you need to be non-all-in. So that's the one condition for it to be in play, but it is pretty cool that, you know, if you were chasing after a draw or, you know, it looks pretty clear your opponent has outdrawn you and your top pair is no good or whatever, you can then save the chips for the next hand. And it does combine with backstab to potentially give a bonus. So you're gambling as to whether or not you'll win the next hand, but if you're able to, you can do some pretty massive damage if you happen to have backstab and hide both on your build. All right, next we have Pilfer. If you lose showdown, heads up, steal 25% of the pot. I'm going to throw this one in S tier because it is a survival skill. The one downside is if it's a multi-way pot, you cannot use Pilfer. So maybe that makes it A tier instead of S tier. But the 25% of the pot, not only do you get that, you take it from your opponent. So it's almost like a 50% swing, which is pretty powerful. So usually if you're losing a big pot, heads up, or you're losing a big pot endgame, it's going to be heads up rather than multi-way. So Pilfer will usually be able to be played, unlike Alibi, which requires a minion to be still in the mix, which often isn't the case deep in a tournament. So I'm going to keep it at S tier, but if you wanted to debate with me with my ranking of that and this thing stuck, again, I'm not going to fight you on that. Next we have Poison Blade. Target opponent that folded to your raise gains the poison debuff for a cycle. I'm going to throw this at D tier. I do like poison. I do think it's a powerful spell, but there are easier ways for us to poison our opponents than Poison Blade. All right, Quick Escape. When folding, take your last bet back from the pot. This one I'm going to throw in B tier. Again, it's similar to Hide in that you have to actually be able to fold to get your rebate, to get your heal. But if you put like, here's a good trick, right? If you put in 90% of your chips pre-flop and then check it down to the river and then realize you're going to lose the hand, you can just fold and you get all those chips back. So if you're going to use this, it's tough. You want to make sure your last bet was a really big one, but you don't want to make it, you want to be careful casting it against an opponent who may just put you all in for the rest of it. So is situational, is specific, but can save you a lot of chips. And the fact that you get the bets back now, as opposed to them going to the next hand, is why I'm ranking it B tier instead of C tier. Next we have Reflexes. Prevent any damage caused by an opponent's ability. I'm going to throw this in D tier. I've talked about it in other tier list videos that I don't think there are that many spells or that many abilities that really cause immediate damage. So I don't think this gets used that much. Skip the line. Take possession of the button at the start of the next hand. It remains in your possession until you lose a hand. This one I'm going to throw in C tier, but if you're doing a button-based build for a thief, it would make its way up to B tier. Same way this thing stuck would get a higher rating if you're doing a button-based build. So maybe at the end of it, I'll say if I'm doing a button-based build thief, I'll move a couple of things around. The reason that it's so beneficial is, well, if you have the button, there are a lot of things that can activate. Longbow, doing damage, spellbook, recovering abilities, ring of regeneration, gaining extra health. And so if you can get the button at a time like the bubble, or in a spot where you have a lot of other abilities that just guarantee you wins, like Gaffle, like Thuggery, like Threaten. You can keep that button for a little while, which makes it very tough for your opponents to play against. All right, next we have Sleight of Hand. Target opponent takes 20% of their health pool and damage. You gain an equal amount. This is Vampiric Touch, but better, because while your opponent in Vampiric Touch loses 20%, you only get 10 of it. In this case, they lose 20 and you get 20. This is just straight thievery. This is straight stealing chips. And it's great because you can just go after the chip leader and get a massive amount of chips. This is one of those few spells, or one of those few abilities that having something like Reflexes could block, or that Counterspell can block. But most classes don't have things ready, and most people don't use the equipment that could potentially block this. Even so, Energy Shield only works 50% of the time. So yeah, it's a great spell, great way to get health, great way to keep yourself in the game. Can also be used as all-in protection. I'm a huge fan, S tier. Next we have Street Cred. Raise 3x the big blind for the price of a call. Cannot be used when someone is all in. So this is like, it's like getting a free straddle, except you got to pay one big blind to get it. You pay one big blind and then you get 2 more for it. So it's not quite, you know, S tier like most free straddles, or even A tier, because, you know, S tier is the free straddle is usually with the extra perk. A tier is just a free straddle. This one's going to be B tier, because you are getting 2 free big blinds, which if you're using it late game can amount to a lot of chips, but you do have to pay a cost to be able to get it. And so that's why, despite it being a free chips ability, I'm going to put it in B tier. Next, we have This Thing Stuck. Keep possession of the button for the next cycle, 3 hands if at the final table. So I'm going to put this at A tier, but when we get to that last bit of discussion at the end of the video, if we're doing a button-based build, it is actually going to be promoted to a higher level. And I think Pilfer is going to be brought down. This is a crazy spell. It lets you keep the button for 6 hands. And if you have the button-based build that lets you get abilities back, you can potentially get This Thing Stuck back and keep the button for 12 hands. Maybe get it back again and keep it for 18 hands. And you could potentially keep the button for a very, very, very long time. The downside to This Thing Stuck, which is why it's not guaranteed S tier, is that when you get moved to a new table, I believe This Thing Stuck deactivates. So I think spells like Might Makes Right stay activated even if you move to another table. This Thing Stuck is particular to that specific table and doesn't carry over if the table breaks. So you have to be strategic about the timing of when you cast it and be aware of that. The other thing about This Thing Stuck that makes it a little bit tougher than other spells to activate is you have to be on the button and see the flop. Yeah, you have to play pre-flop and see the flop to be able to cast it. So it's a little harder to cast than some of the other spells. But if you're able to pull it off, it's very powerful. And yeah, at the end of the video, we'll talk about bumping it to S tier. Something that is guaranteed to be S tier is Threaten. Target opponent takes 100% of their total bets back this hand from the pot and then folds. Also gains the bleed debuff for 6 hands. I don't care so much about the bleed debuff, but I do love this because it is the ultimate in all-in protection. You get to the river and you look like you're going to lose the pot, make your opponent fold. You're not going to chip up on the hand, but you're going to guarantee that you don't lose anything on the hand. And it makes it very annoying for people to play pots against you, especially all-in pots, because they can be all in and ahead and you're just like, actually, no. You're just going to go ahead and take those bets back and you're just going to go walk away from this alley, and I'm going to keep what's mine and keep what I started with, and nothing you can do about it. So Threaten, very powerful. I also think that it's, other than Counterspell, I don't think it can be blocked. Okay, next we have Thuggery. When losing a showdown, heads up with a non-dragon minion, steal the pot. This is similar to Gaffle. The difference is Gaffle is a spell that's cast on the river, whereas Thuggery is cast on the showdown. So Thuggery, I think, is slightly better, but they're basically the same play. You get into a big pot with the minion that's not a dragon, and if you win it, great. And if you lose it, you cast Thuggery and you win it anyway. So again, pure thievery, pure theft, just grand larceny, straight stealing, and really, really, really fun way to play. Next, we have Toxic Bait. When UTG, any player calling your bet receives the poisoned debuff for a cycle. This is kind of like Poison Blade, except it's the opposite. This is if they call you, whereas Poison Blade is if they fold to you. I'm going to throw it on D tier. because it only targets one opponent. And while I love poison, you know, it's only targeting one opponent, and there are easier ways to poison your opponents. With that being the next ability we're looking at, Venom Spray. Opponents gain the poison debuff for 6 hands. This one's going to be A tier. It targets the entire table. It gives them all poison for 6 hands. It can be a great way to knock players out of an event. If they don't have the cleansing debuff abilities, I mean, you can just send them GG. If people are really short, you could cast Cut Purse, right? Force them to be all in. They have their healing potions ready and their healing spells ready. Well, no sir, because you just go ahead and cast Venom Spray, get them all with the poison debuff, and if they don't happen to win that hand, they're going to be out of the game. So when used in combination with some other abilities, Venom Spray, extremely powerful, and it can just be kind of lights out for your opponents if cast at the right time. You just need to make sure that they don't have the cleansing debuff abilities. And if I'm not mistaken, most of the cleansing debuff abilities are activated on the flop. I don't know if they all have like flop and river, or if most of them are flop only. And if that's the case, where most of them are flop only, then this would be extra deadly. But I'm doing a little scrolling, and I'm seeing that flop and river, I'm seeing flop and river. Yeah, most of them are actually flop and river, so never mind. I thought I saw something that wasn't there, because if the cleanse debuff abilities were only on the flop, then you could just wait till the river to cast this and people couldn't counter it. But my mistake. I'm always in game being like, well, if they don't get to the flop, they can't cast this cleanse, so I can keep them debuffed for a while. But I forgot that they can do it on the flop or the river, and that's what gets them kind of out of trouble. So this is how I rank the Thief's abilities. But if I am doing a pure button manipulation strategy and a button-based build, which is actually what I do play currently with my 557 Thief, I would throw this thing stuck into S tier and bring Pilfer down into A tier, because I don't really need the all-in protection as much when I can use Threaten to force my opponents to fold, and these other spells to just steal chips. The other thing that I would move if I am doing a pure button-based strategy is I would throw Quick Escape down into the C, similar to Pilfer, right? The heal is just not quite as good, and I would throw Skip the Line into the B tier, because I could start things off by taking the button with this thing stuck, and if I'm not able to recover that ability with my Spellbook or Blackjack or Dragon's Tooth Talisman, then I can follow it up with Skip the Line to get the button that way and give myself even more hands to potentially reactivate one of those abilities. Also, having Threaten in the mix with Skip the Line is very effective, because you can basically guarantee that you're going to win the next all-in pot that you play, because if you get all in and called, well, you just cast Threaten and force them to fold, and you get to win that pot, no showdown. The one time that's not going to work is if you're in a multi-way all-in, because Threaten only allows you to force one opponent to fold as opposed to 2 or 3 or 4 opponents. So that's the one time it can backfire, but it's pretty rare early mid-game, unless you're playing against minions, that you're going to get called in 2 spots when you're playing all-in bets. And if you do get called by minions, they're usually calling you with crap, and odds are you'll probably beat one of them in the all-in, and then you just use Threaten to force the other guy to fold, and you still win the pot. So if you're going for a pure button strategy, which is focused on using the equipment that activates some percentage of the time that you have the button, then in that case, this thing stuck is going to be moved up to S tier, and Skip the Line is going to be moved up to B tier. Pretty close to being A tier as well, honestly, if that's the main focus of your strategy. But when it comes to the equipment, I'm going to be covering that in another video. So if you liked this video on the Thieves ability tier list, I think you will probably enjoy even more my ability tier list video that's going to be coming up next. So that's going to wrap up my tier list for the Thief abilities in Heroes of Hold'em. Again, after I bred a really good Thief that had some nice stats, 557 Orc Thief, I've been absolutely loving it, playing it an absolute ton, and having so much fun. I'm really, fingers crossed, hoping that before we get on chain with the official launch of the game, when beta's done, that the Thief will get one more ability, because you add one more to this list at the top, Whether it's, I'd probably throw Venom Spray in there. If I'm playing a tough lineup, I mean, I need to evade traps. But Arcane, Plunder, probably good if I'm playing the Horde. And if I'm playing in like a field where I don't necessarily think everyone's going to have the cleanse debuffs, I mean, Venom Spray can just end the game right there. And that's the really fun thing about the Thief. You get to steal a lot of pots, you force your opponents to put some chips in, you get to call all these raises for free, and then you just hit them with the poison and they're out the game. So I learned a lot from playing it. It's been a lot of fun. I also want to give a shout out to the community members and the devs who helped me with making this tier list, because they had a lot more experience with the Thief than I did at the time I was initially planning out this video, before I did the breeding and got some play, and then could really, you know, add in more with my own opinion and first-hand experience from playing the Thief. So I hope you learned from this video and find great benefit in it. I hope that it helps you build better thieves to help you get more caches and ultimately get more wins. If you have your thoughts on ranking these abilities a little bit differently, feel free to post in the comments what you think should be moved around and why. It's a great opportunity for us to learn from each other, not just me sharing my thoughts, but you sharing your thoughts as well, for me to be able to learn from you and other people who are reading the comments as well. So yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this video, and it's also going to wrap it up for the tier list series. I hope you enjoyed them. I hope you get better results in Heroes of Hold'em because of them, and I thank you so much for watching. Until next time, this has been Evan Jarvis for Heroes of Hold'em saying, you know what to do. Take what you learned, go out there and get stacking. Peace.